Witam towarzyszy, to jest Polinkash, and today we're going to be doing a reaction video to Re-Education's video on the Vanguard Party. And I'm here today with my good friend Danov.
Hey.
And yeah, let's just get right into it.
Hi, my name is Aaron, and this is my show, Re-Education. And today I'm going to talk just briefly about the Vanguard Party. Now, a lot of Marxist-Leninists and MLMs are probably just about to scream at this moment, but I'm going to tell you that the Vanguard Party was a horrible idea.
How are you going to recover from this?
And it has led to the...
Is it just me, or does he seem like very patronizing? Like,
sometimes I just don't like this kind of tone. I don't know. This is probably like not the best thing to start off on, but like his tone is very like artistic. I like it, but sometimes it comes off as very, as you said, patronizing almost. But it's
it is like a good media voice, right? But the way that he's talking about it here is just like very patronizing. But whatever, we'll continue.
We're not poisoning the well, don't worry.
So holding on to this idea is foolish. Now let me explain why. At the very beginning of the formation of the Soviet Union, there was a lot of discussion about how they should go about achieving the revolution. The revolution being worker control of the means of production. If you're not a communist or socialist or leftist in general, these are probably brand new concepts to you. And I'll introduce them by saying, for sake of argument, let's consider that the Soviet Union wasn't a good or bad thing, but a neutral thing. And we're only specifically...
Well, from Marxist analysis, that is the case. Like, Marxism is not an argument of ethics, it's an argument of societal development. Even Marxists are willing to, like, accept this, accept this view, because the thing is that people don't understand that Marxism is not a moralist ideology. Like,
Definitely.
Marxists are not moralists. We have a scientific outlook on societal development.
Yeah, it's not like... Oh, sorry.
Yeah, and so we're not, like, nobody, like, sure, personally, I think that the Bolshevik Revolution was a good thing, and I'm sure many other people probably agree with me, but it's not really an objective thing, right? So, objectively, we should always look at these things neutral, so...
It's not like back in the past Marx said slave society was bad, but now today we're good, right?
Yeah, right.
It's not, it was never really like that, But
Yeah.
I mean, I guess because of the general nature of the video, I guess that may apply, but in like a theoretical context, it's not really something that is, I would say, necessarily valid, per se.
Right.
talking about the processes in which we used to create the Soviet Union. You have to remember that this is around 1917 to 1920s. There was no Soviet Union to speak of yet. It was all just a figment of their imagination. So the ways in which we could go about achieving such a thing were wide open. The territory was a broad field of ideas. And one of those ideas was to create something called a Vanguard Party. The idea of a Vanguard Party is basically a small elite group of Marxist-Leninists who are able to go around convincing the agrarian population to side with their idea of socialism.
I have something to add.
And
okay, now there were many ideas floating around, but like by that point, the Bolsheviks were kind of already settled on the idea of a Vanguard Party. I mean, Lenin already wrote this. Like what he wrote, What Is to Be Done in like 1901, 1902. So it wasn't like as if there were lots of contending ideas. Like the Bolsheviks were already very much settled on the idea. It's not as if there was like a fluidity.
Yeah, the Vanguard Party didn't just come randomly out of fruition during the early stages of the revolution. Like the Vanguard Party idea had existed, for a long time before the actual revolution happened.
And let's not even talk about the Mensheviks.
Right.
And once they have sided with their idea of socialism, they would basically erect the Soviets, which is what their group was called, the Soviets, as the leadership.
I feel like this guy doesn't know, obviously he did correct himself there, but I feel like he doesn't know what Soviet means, ironically. Because if you knew, what Soviet meant, then you probably wouldn't make that mistake, but I don't know, maybe he knows now. But yeah, probably probably I would assume that he doesn't know that Soviets are worker councils, which is like okay because a lot of people on the left don't know that Soviet means worker council. I'm not using this against this guy, but I do want to point this out for people that don't know what a Soviet is. To put it in very simple and vulgar terms, a Soviet is simply the Russian word for worker council.
Fun fact.
Of the proletariat, as basically a group of proletariat being elevated to the position of leadership, which...
All right, I have something to add.
In those days...
Lenin used the term bourgeois intelligentsia, if I'm pronouncing that correctly. Intelligentsia? Whatever.
Intelligentsia, yeah.
Yeah, intelligentsia. He used that to describe the people who would lead the Vanguard Party. Because if you consider, the state Russia was in, most people were illiterate, most people were not educated, like they were not in a state to actually have the necessary education to like do these things like running a revolution, management, things like that. Like these were typically held by people who were already in good financial status and could actually make the ventures to do these kinds of things and have the luxuries to pursue these kinds of endeavors that would have not otherwise been possible for people who were just on like the bottom of the food chain, average workers, peasants, things like that. Right. And that's where the distinction is. Lenin says in the What Is to Be Done that, it's not like a certain class of the proletariat. I mean, well, kind of they are, I guess, but it's mostly it's specifically the bourgeois intelligentsia, because they occupy, at least relative to the material conditions in Russia, a special kind of character, as I mentioned, which allows them to have a better position in leading a revolution relative to, as I mentioned, the people who were illiterate, could not read, and were generally not educated enough.
The uneducated masses, right?
Yeah, and this is something relative to the material conditions of Russia, and that's something very important to understand.
Yes. Yeah. But let's hear this guy out more before we get deep into the critique.
Was looked at by anarchists as being nothing more than, well, basically what it is, a transfer of power from one elite group to another. That's all.
Okay, so that's extremely dishonest because, firstly, like, as Danov was saying, the Vanguard Party, as Danov said, is essentially just the intelligentsia, organizing the uneducated, illiterate, masses, the peasantry primarily, who made up the majority of the proletariat. They were supposed to organize these uneducated people into a revolution. Now, like, saying that this is simply a transfer from one elite to another elite is extremely dishonest because the bourgeois class that ended up taking over Russia after Kerensky's coup, they were not in the interest of the workers. Like, they were capitalists, right? They were members of they were bourgeois capitalists who were trying to liberalize Russia. And so, and before them, you had the Tsar, the reactionary aristocracy that ran Russia. To say that, oh well, this is just a transition from one elite group to another, that's not true, because the fucking the Vanguard Party that would take the power from the liberals that came to power from Kerensky's coup were not in the interest of liberalization and capitalist development. They were more interested in a proletarian revolution, the establishment of a dictatorship of the proletariat, and a development of the economy to sustain a socialist society. And so, to be so arrogantly
reductionist,
reductionist is just like, it's dishonest at best.
Yeah, I mean, I think that. Oh, sorry. The political, like the material, social, and like political conditions that change under, the under the USSR, like that was something that is not just a matter of transfer of power, because there's a kind of underlying assumption that that things would stay the same, right? And fundamentally, the economic system changed, the political system changed, and all of these changes occurred, which does not indicate that it was just a transfer of power. That just to me, or not just to me, but in general, in the context of what happened, is just not accurate. Considering like how much like initiative there was to actually get things going and changed and have a manner that was not liberal or reactionary in that manner, like that was something that was just not seen in a matter of transfer of power. That was
right.
that was fundamentally like different what they were doing. It wasn't just changing power and then new people, same style of system. It was fundamentally different.
Right. I mean, like, you have to fucking understand that the Kerensky, oh, okay, this is just a transfer from one elite group to another elite group. You do realize that this fucking transfer of power was supported by the majority of people because Kerensky's, the liberal government that came out of Kerensky's coup, were not making any substantial or real changes. They're not doing anything differently. And so when the Bolsheviks, this vanguard came in and took power, there were legitimate changes and there was legitimate progress towards a more free and democratic society. And to say otherwise is just ignorant. Like, you can't possibly say that Russia under the Kerensky liberal government was the same as under the Bolsheviks. Like, no, it fucking was not. Like, that's so dishonest.
All it was. And that is all it is. Basically, when you transferred the power from one elite group to another, all you're doing is creating a situation where the king has died, long live the king, where basically the monarch had been removed to be replaced by another monarch. And that doesn't create...
Okay, so what you're saying is that the Bolsheviks were somehow monarchs. Like, you do realize that they set up the Soviet system, right? Like the democratic system in Russia, in the Soviet Union. Like the Vanguard Party did not just declare themselves to be absolute leaders, to be fucking. They did not declare themselves to be dictators of the fucking country. You had a fucking democratic apparatus. Like, the Soviet system existed, and it was a democratic process, and it worked. From the very foundations of the fucking society, the proletarians had full participation in the system. The proletariat finally had power in the Soviet Union, and that was because of the fucking Bolsheviks.
No, I can add something else as well.
Socialism.
I mean, most of the I don't know much about the anarchist critiques, but I know much more about the other tendencies of communist critiques regarding the Soviet Union, and they, I mean, even they the left comms, or at least the Luxemburgists who were the precursor to the Italian left comms, they understood, at least to some extent, that Russia, it was not just from a white class of people controlling society to the red class. They didn't see it that way. They saw even the most extreme tendencies of left comms. They saw that things change in Russia, but they saw that it was in kind of a degenerated state, if to generalize, right? But even the left communist detractors didn't say that it was just transfer of power like that and nothing else changed. I mean, I would like to see these anarchist documentations. I don't want to put him on the spot, but I don't know much about that, and I would like to actually see anarchist critiques of the Bolshevik Revolution, maybe from the Black Army. I don't know.
Well, they often from my experience, anarchists will often criticize the Bolsheviks' suppression of anarchists like Makhno or the fucking what was it, that Leningrad port incident? I forgot what it was called exactly.
Kronstadt.
Yeah, Kronstadt. Yeah. They'll bring up those things. You do realize that the Kronstadt quote unquote revolutionaries were pretty much reactionary socialists, right? They wanted to give the peasantry essentially private ownership of their own land. They essentially wanted to return to a more socially progressive semi-feudalism. That's essentially what they were wanting to do. And it's the same thing with Makhno, how Makhno just essentially just became a fucking warlord, a semi-feudal warlord. And that's the thing about anarchists during the Russian Revolution, is that they weren't actually proposing any legitimate progressive change in the socioeconomic in the socioeconomic system. They had no cohesive plan on where Russia should go.
One more thing. Michael Parenti also did a video discussing authoritarianism in the Soviet Union, and he actually mentions Kronstadt, which also touches on authoritarianism, as I mentioned, in the USSR. And that may be plugged here, I guess, edited somewhere. I don't know. There's a certain part where he talks about that. So that could be there, I guess.
A totalitarian dictatorship of the proletariat by...
Go ahead.
What are your thoughts on this?
Oh, okay. You want me to go? Okay, hold on. I'll just.
Which you are specifically referring to as the Vanguard Party, the elite group of Marxist-Leninists that were able to convince the rest of the population to vote their party in, or to basically raise their party up. When you're talking about that,
Okay,
we're
yeah, I think that's
talking
his point
about-
finished at that point. Okay. So he uses kind of like this wordplay where like you have like the word dictatorship, but I actually found a fun fact where the word dictatorship, as it translated from German to English, does not have the same connotation as like as it does in the English language in the modern day. You think of dictatorship as okay, small group or like one man controls the whole government or whatever, that kind of stereotype. But dictatorship was like the word dictatorship is used in its actual like original definition as into like dictate. By dictatorship, like that is like dictatorship of the proletariat is that the proletariat dictates the political system and the government. Like the proletariat dictate that. It's not like dictatorship and then you have proletarians in there, right? Like that's something that is, I would say, a kind of thing that was not necessarily lost in translation, but that's something to actually think about because a lot of that plays into the connotation of the word dictatorship. But just clearing that up there regarding the word and how dictatorship of the proletariat actually is meant.
Yeah, I mean, absolutely. Like, it's either because he doesn't know what he's talking about, or he's actually purposely trying to, be dishonest and try to use these buzzwords like, oh, totalitarian dictatorship of the proletariat. Like, you do realize, first of all, it's not totalitarian. Like, please give me evidence of how the USSR became a totalitarian fucking state because of the Vanguard Party. Like, please tell me how that was the case. It's almost as if they set up like a participatory democratic system for the proletarians to directly fucking work with the government or something. But also, the dictatorship of the proletariat is such a basic Marxist concept. And for somebody to claim to be a leftist and then use the word dictatorship of the proletariat, phrase dictatorship of the proletariat as some sort of negative thing, you're clearly ignorant on basic Marxist theory. Like, the dictatorship of the proletariat, as Danov said, is not a literal dictatorship. It is where the proletariat controls the state. They have ultimate say in the state because class society throughout all of the existence of civilization from agricultural revolution, humanity has been organized into class society, and every single socioeconomic system is dictated by a dictatorship of class, right? So, for example, in feudalism, you have like the dictatorship of the aristocracy. And then in capitalism, you have the dictatorship of the bourgeoisie. Socialism is the dictatorship of the proletariat. And until the class system is abolished, there will always be a dictatorship of class. And the dictatorship of proletariat exists specifically to abolish that dynamic, that dialectic of class dictatorship. And so, of course, you have this the typical case of the idealist anarchist who believes that somehow these illiterate, uneducated peasants will be able to spontaneously form a decentralized revolution and overtake the liberal state propped up by Kerensky by however means. It's pure idealism. It would never happen. This is why anarchist revolutions never succeeded. It's because there is no way to have a mass of uneducated, illiterate proletarians to just spontaneously and just have decentralized revolution. Like that doesn't happen. That doesn't work. Like even when we look at peasant revolts during feudalism, they were 99% of the time they were unsuccessful, and it's because of the fact that the dictatorship of class, the aristocracy, had a control over the state, and these peasants who were spontaneously forming peasant revolts did not stand a chance against the armed forces of the state. And so, in order to combat the fact that we're going up against an armed state, we need a centralized mass revolution. This cannot be a spontaneous decentralized revolution. That does not work. At least not in Russia's time, in the material in the material conditions of Lenin's time, I mean. And so, like, to expect anything else but the formation of a vanguard party in the Bolshevik Revolution is purely idealism. You cannot expect any. You should not expect any other system to take place in that revolution. If anything, like anything even remotely like what you're proposing, this spontaneous decentralized revolution were to happen, they would lose, because the fucking Magnitists lost, and like there's a reason why it happened the way it did.
Yeah. I should add that if the revolution were to happen in Russia today, it wouldn't go out the same exact way. Like, you know, like, right. But in the case of Russia, like this was how the material conditions like developed. Like the way it happened in Russia would certainly not be the same way as it would happen in a different place across the world, whether it's, you know, whether it was in Cuba or for example, post World War II, when nations were kind of like converted, right? That was also very fundamentally different, not necessarily a revolution at the same time. Right. And based on geopolitics and all these different factors, like the way this is adapted changes, and it's not like the way it happened in Russia is going to be the same way as it happens everywhere else. But the Vanguard, in general, still plays that kind of important role, but it's not going to be as if it's done in Russia every single time. And that's how things change. And that also goes into how, you know, maybe the Vanguard Party will not, like the Vanguard Party is not constant in the context of Russia. It's fluid in different contexts and different material conditions, and it will end up happening in different ways in different places in different regions across the world according to different conditions and all these innumerable factors.
Here, let's just continue to hear what he has to say before we make any further statements.
Yeah. A system that inherently breeds not communism, but state capitalism.
Oh boy.
State capitalism doesn't go away. It just perpetuates more state capitalism.
All right, can you stop here?
Okay.
All right. Actually, does he explain it something after?
Let me see.
Yeah, because
Leninism is that eventually, once you create a socialist
I don't
state,
think he explains state capitalism.
State,
I mean, he has a definition. He kind of does, but like state capitalism, for it to be capitalism, there needs to be a profit motive. Like, there was NEP during the 20s, right? But then the profit motive...
1928, yeah.
Yeah, until the 20s. But then the NEP was that kind of, like, transitional period, you know, to make up for the semi-feudalism that Russia had, right? But essentially, once that kind of synthetic capitalist phase was finished, or, well, at least finished according to Stalin, but, you know, yeah, pretty much finished, I guess, in that regard, you had the transition to what a Marxist-Leninist would say, you know, a socialist type of system. And in that, you do not have a necessarily, or really, I mean, yeah, you have like production quotas, but this is not profit. Like it's not production for the sake of profit.
In the NEP, there was profit motive, but it was in special economic zones, and also it was mandated by the proletarian dictatorship. Like,
yeah, that too.
It was regulated. Essentially, state capitalism is, or the NEP in you know, the USSR was state capitalism regulated by the dictatorship of the proletariat. This is the problem, right? This person, like, I understand where this person's ignorance comes from, because I used to say very similar things like years ago. And this comes out of the whole common, like, you know, anti-USSR, like Dr. Wolf type rhetoric, where it's like, oh, the Soviet Union was always state capitalist, blah, 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 whatever, right? Not real socialism. And so I sympathize, but at the same time, it's just, like, so dishonest, because you understand that the state like the way that he uses state capitalism is like this. He represents it as an ideology and not a temporary development phase. Like, once again, this ultimately comes down to idealism, and really the reason why is because the NEP in the USSR existed specifically to make up for the semi-feudal conditions, the fact that capitalism had not had enough development in Russia up until that point. And so Lenin started the NEP, and then Stalin would later finish the NEP in 1928 and start transitioning into an underdeveloped lower phase of socialism, and then would begin the 5-year plans and whatnot. And so no, state capitalism does not breed more state capitalism as you claim. State capitalism simply existed as a scientific process to advance the socioeconomic conditions of Russia and the Soviet Union as a whole.
And these conditions would definitely change, like I said, according to where it would happen across the world. This kind of template formulated by Lenin is not homogeneous. So it's important to note that how it occurred in Russia, as I said before several times, it would not be copied and pasted to every single place across the world. And it wasn't even like that in real life, as it happened in the 20th century.
Yeah,
so
and that's another point that has to be made. This libertarian, socialist, ANCOM, whatever, views all ideology through this idealist perspective. Oh, the Marxist-Leninists just want to do the fucking Bolshevik Revolution again, whatever, right? No reliable ML believes that the future revolutions will be anything like the Bolshevik Revolution. We are under completely different material conditions, and although the same fundamental ideas or theories or concepts may still be at play, the specifics and the nuances, etc., will be vastly different. And this is because it's a scientific process. We don't believe in some one size fits all ideology like anarchists do, right? We're not like that. We view reality through a materialist lens, through a scientific process. We view social development as a material thing, not some battle of ideals.
Things like money and hierarchies would just wither away and disappear. But
right, because that's not any more sensical than just fucking abolishing them, right? Like, oh yeah, what a stupid idea. Oh, these things are just gonna wither away. We should just abolish them instead because that's gonna work, right? Ironically enough.
We already kind of explained that anyway, so it's kind of like,
Yeah, it's just so ironic because the irony is he's making out this withering away process to seem as like this, oh, well, that's so idealist. But I'm positive that, he believes that these things should be abolished immediately. Now, you tell me what sounds more idealist, allowing these conditions of class society and etc. to wither away slowly, or abolishing them immediately, bombastically, and spontaneously. Like, what sounds more reasonable? I don't understand.
Clearly, that isn't what happened, or whatever could happen, because when you create a dictatorship, all you've done is create a dictatorship. You haven't created anything else. And you even
there is no creation of a dictatorship. It's a transfer of power. The dictatorship has existed from the inception of civilization itself. There is a dictatorship of class that exists along with class society, and he's acting as if the Bolsheviks just literally installed a dictatorship. It's not. It's a transfer of power that will eventually lead to a withering away process.
I mean, even he said transfer of power. He even said transfer of power. So I'm not quite sure if he's contradicting himself there. I can't be so sure. But I mean, as you said, there it is. Yeah. He mentioned how the USSR can go towards full communism, right? A Finnish Bolshevik made a video on that. I'm pretty sure that can be linked here, or just referenced somewhere in the video. And I mean, it's not just because Vanguardism did not fail. It wasn't the ideology that failed the USSR. This is ignoring all of the geopolitical, economic, all these historical factors that played into the actual ending of the Soviet Union. It wasn't just Vanguardism failed. I mean, and there's a very long debate between Marxists, but I can say that it wasn't just the Vanguard Party that played a role, or at least how Degenerated played a role. It was also the way foreign policy of capitalist countries played into restricting the USSR from natural resources, therefore weakening its ability to project power and therefore expand its ability to go towards communism. And even so, you can't have communism in one state. Like that's literally contradictory. The thing is,
exactly.
you have to have the entire world be a dictatorship of the proletariat, or at least the vast majority of it, to actually facilitate a transition. Because then, well, if you enter that kind of quote unquote libertarian phase, then you're just going to get crushed by the bourgeois state apparatus that still has its capabilities, while you're still liberal, you're still becoming like a libertarian communist society, and then that just wouldn't fucking work. Just like how Pol Pot tried to go backwards and then go to agrarian hellhole.
Right.
He just got basically wrecked by Vietnam because he killed a bunch of friggin' people and tried to degenerate the society to that kind of quote unquote libertarian stage. That just doesn't happen.
Like a libertarian,
and also
agrarian, basically trying to establish semi-feudalism. Like that's the thing is the anarchists, due to their idealist nature, they don't look forward. They just they don't look in a historical way. They look at it in in an ideological way, where it's just okay, well, we just need to convince everybody that this is the right system and it'll just happen, right? Like that's not how that works. You need the right conditions in order for a society to be established. Like you can't just do whatever the fuck you want at any period of time because there are material restrictions. And that's just a fact of the fucking universe. Like, that's the problem, right? It's ultimately a contradiction of worldview.
Also, one more thing. Pol Pot was CIA, by the way. Just saying.
Oh, yeah, Pol Pot, yeah, exactly. Pol Pot was... I mean, you have Pol Potists out there who will, defend Pol Pot, but it's just so... It's so dumb because... The UN supported Pol Pot's government after Vietnam kicked him out of Cambodia. Pol Pot's government still held the seat for Cambodia in the UN even after he had been exiled from the country. If that doesn't prove that he is literally a fucking Western propped up, essentially fascist, I don't know what does.
Didn't turn into a communist country. China today went from a state capitalist country to a regular capitalist country. It's capitalism classic.
That's not true. The China is not a classic capitalist country currently. It's very dishonest to say that China is literally just capitalism right now. They are state capitalist, and obviously they're shit. Compared to when Mao was still alive, at least policy-wise. But they're not classically capitalist. They're not the same form of capitalism that fucking the US is or most NATO countries. They're not. They are distinct. It's just dishonest to say that they're just capitalist now. No, they're still state capitalist.
And their economy is not doing well because of it. It just seen the largest crash that it's ever seen in the past, I think, 70 years? That isn't to say that every part of Marxism-Leninism is incorrect. It's not. But the idea of a Vanguard party is a horrible, horrible idea. When you create a situation where your ideals are tied to a man, your ideals will die with that man if he dies.
Okay, I mean, this is literal idealism.
Yeah, this is
actual idealism. This is actual idealism. I mean, Stalin tried to resign 4 times. There was a video from
8 times. Technically.
8 really 8 times. Okay. Okay, well, at least 4 times. I know Remy Studio made a video about the 4, or at least the 4 major times where he tried to resign.
Even regardless of Stalin's attempt to resign, this is such a terrible assumption that just all Marxist-Leninists are just worshippers of Stalin and just oh yeah, dude, Stalin is the father of ML. No, that's not what we fucking think. That's not how we think. We're not like anarchists. We don't believe in, these quote-unquote set of ideals. That's not what it is. This is, quite literally, as Zizek would put it, pure fucking ideology. It's just so, foolish to think that, what the fuck? Sorry, I got a text.
Alright, I guess this is where, the video cuts off for a second.
Oh, my phone fucking died. God damn it. Well,
Keep that in. Keep that in. The thing about the cult of personality is that Stalin himself actually like fought against the cult of personality. There was one instance. Comrade Hakim, made a video about this actually not a little while ago, but like over a year ago, and discussing like how Stalin himself was against the whole cult of personality. I mean, like there was one point where I think they tried to rename the city of Moscow after him. Stalin was like, "No, this is actually getting out of hand. Like, this is kind of weird." And even in personal letters to other people that were discovered, I think after his death, he said, "Don't put me on this pedestal. Like, I don't. The accomplishment of the USSR is an accomplishment of like the people, not of individuals."
oh
right?
yeah,
And
absolutely. Like
even
the
like Stalin
fetishization-
himself said this.
This is a well-known fact among MLs that Stalin was actually completely against his fucking cult of personality. Like, it was actually the central committee that built the fucking the cult of personality around him, and he was constantly trying to moderate it.
I mean, yeah, the cult of personality it's not even an intention; it's a side effect.
It is a side effect. Ultimately, it is a side effect. Yes.
For essentially all intents and purposes, it is a side effect, not the intention. Like it's not in the theory. Like there's no theory that says make a cult of personality around idealism or whatever.
It's
not
not
there.
a theoretical thing to turn fucking the leaders of the revolution like having like a cult of personality. Like that's not a theoretical thing. Like that's not part of theory. It's just a side effect.
Yeah, it also literally ignores what the Vanguard Party actually is for, which is for transition in a revolutionary scenario. It's not supposed to be this thing that stays for 100 billion years.
Right.
It just,
let's let him finish.
Like,
let him finish
okay.
before we like get our full critiques out.
But if you create a system where your ideals are standing on their own, they can never be defeated. That's why pinning your ideals all onto one man like Stalin or onto a small group of individuals like the Vanguard Party is foolish. It's completely foolish, and it's exactly what's got us into this problem in the first place. Dictatorships only ever produce dictatorships. Yeah. They never can produce anything else. So then what could possibly be an alternative? Like I said before, I'm not about the problems. I'm about, say it with me, the solution.
Okay, but like
I think at this point, yeah.
So
I remember watching
let me
like I said before, a mass line, preferably a decentralized mass line. As I believe that is the best method that we have to be able to subvert.
Yeah, this is the part where he transitions into his own like argument
itself. Okay, now if you want a little bit more in depth into this, please check out my video up here. And yeah, hopefully that'll give you a little bit more information. I believe that a Trojan horse strategy, whereas we subvert capitalism from the inside, is the best course of action, whereas I believe a Vanguard Party creates nothing but more dictatorship.
Okay, so first of all, like, so I want to make my.
Could I mention one real quick thing? Thing. The mass line and Vanguard Party, they're not incompatible. They're not inherently mutually exclusive. Like,
yeah, of course not.
It's not one. It's not one or the other.
He wants a decentralized mass line. No, but so basically, what I've gathered from this video is Vanguard Party bad because it creates a cult of personality, and dictatorships are not good. So basically, the entire basis of your point for this video comes out of ignorance. Because, first of all, the cult of personality has nothing to do with Vanguard Party. And this whole, like, concept of putting your ideals on one man or one few group, like, what does that even mean? Like, what is that even supposed to really mean? Like, and then he goes on to say, if you have your ideals, like built on their own ground, like what does that even mean? What does that entail? Like, are you saying that like this is ultimately the problem of idealism, is that it's full of like flowery language that doesn't actually propose anything practical. It's just like, well, you just need your ideals to be independent and not dependent on a group of people. What is that even? Are you saying that we should like put like our ideals in fucking computer? Like, it's such a non-practical way of describing like the development of ideology and the organization of society. Like, this is such an irrelevant thing to really point out. And furthermore, like, this whole idea, like the decentralized mass line. Please tell me that I want you to tell me with a straight face that a decentralized mass line would work in 1917 in the material conditions of Russia post World War One, during and post World War One. Please tell me how you plan on having a massive group of illiterate, uneducated peasants spontaneously organize into a decentralized mass line and overthrow the government. Please tell me how that could possibly work out in any fucking scenario. It's just absolutely, it's practically childish to believe that would work. Like, to think that, how could that possibly happen? The fact of the matter is that what happened in the Russian Revolution happened for a reason, and it was successful for a reason. Nothing just happens for no fucking reason. The fact of the matter is that the intellectuals of Russia organized into a central vanguard party that would lead the uneducated, illiterate proletarians into a revolution, because they were not capable, and to some extent still are not capable, of having a spontaneous decentralized revolution. And you know, we can argue about, like, fine, we can argue about whether or not the relevance or the potential that has in current society, you know, given the fact that you know, education and literacy and etc. is different now than it was 100 years ago. Fine, whatever, we can have that conversation. But to debate that 100 years ago we should have used this supposed system you're proposing, it's just so out there. It's so, like, completely unrealistic, and really by definition idealism. Like, I've been saying idealism a lot in this video, and really it's because that's the core fundamental part of anarchist and you know, generally libertarian socialist theory. It's all idealism, a totally unpractical worldview, not seeing human historical progress as a scientific and materialistic thing, and more as a you know, a battleground of ideas. You know, the fact that, oh well, if the people simply had the right ideas, we would be in a better position, right? Like, that's not how, I'm sorry, but that's not how fucking society works. The people having the right idea of society is not enough to have change or to have a better society. That's not enough. There are material conditions, there are processes, there are various scientific facts about, you know, reality and society that limit us. Unfortunately, the universe is not limitless, okay? It's not as if you can just simply do whatever you want whenever you want. And ultimately, when you really look at this ideology, it all comes down to the belief that anything can be done ever. Like, literally, you can do whatever the fuck you want at any time, and there's no restriction. And of course, I'm not saying that any anarchists are out there openly saying this, like, oh yeah, there's material conditions don't matter, whatever. But that's essentially what they're insinuating, and that's essentially what their whole ideology is based upon, is just this idea that humans are limitless, that we are, that the only thing that holds us back is our ideals. That's simply not true. Our ideals are not the only things, and probably one of the things that fucking limit us the least. The true limit is the material status of the material conditions of society, and where we are in historical development. And yeah, like, you know, criticizing the Vanguard Party in Russia, China, you know, all successful historical revolutions, to criticize the Vanguard Party in those situations is just so ignorant. It's so just absolutely ignorant. And
there's certainly critique to be made. I mean, it's not perfect. That's why, you know,
of course
it is
not.
It, you know, I like it is like, we're not saying that, okay, yeah, you know, there's no flaws or whatever, but there are still many things, and there are many lessons to learn from what happened in Russia. that we can
Right.
apply to a new set of material conditions in a new century. And that's
Right.
very important because there's very much like I feel like there's like a very homogenous tone when it comes to how he describes these things, like how as I mentioned, like it would apply in 1917 as it would, I guess, in this year, right? And for us, that's clearly not the case. The Vanguard Party, as I mentioned before, that it would not be applied in the same way as it was in Russia in 100 years ago, right?
Of course.
It's not. There's really not many other ways to say this, really. And just quickly going back on the point regarding Stalin and cult of personality, can we go back to 446 real quick because I want to know the context in which I was saying this. Yeah, just because, or actually no, a little bit before then, because I actually put down the time that was the end of that.
That's why pinning your ideals all onto one man like Stalin or onto a small group of individuals like the Vanguard Party is foolish. It's completely foolish, and it's exactly what's got us into this problem in the first place.
So that kind of perspective, I think I had it noted down here around 446. I added quickly that it was kind of idealistic and not reflective of how people in the USSR treated communism, or at least how it meant to them, and it also doesn't reflect the material conditions, geopolitics, economics, etc., that led to them having that kind of, I guess, opinion.
Ultimately, like, this comes out of just a very surface level understanding of these ideas. Like, clearly this person does not know enough about Marxist theory to be able to speak on these things. When it comes to the Vanguard and historical developments of socialism, like, this is a learning process. I'm not going to say that there are no dogmatic Marxist-Leninists out there, because there absolutely are dogmatic Marxist-Leninists out there.
Certainly.
But the actually reliable Marxist-Leninists out there are not saying that the Russian Revolution was perfect. Of course, the Russian Revolution was not perfect. Of course, the Chinese Revolution was not perfect. Of course, all of the Marxist-Leninist revolutions of history were not perfect and had problems, and we have to correct those problems as we learn from them. This is a scientific process. This is something that we have to develop over time. This is just how, this is exactly how the bourgeoisie would take power from the aristocracy during the transition from feudalism to capitalism. That transition happened through a learning process. There were many bourgeois revolutions. It took many bourgeois revolutions and coups and etc. and transfers of dictatorship of class to actually finally make that transition from feudalism to capitalism. It was a long process, and to expect anything to happen immediately, just like that, poof, capitalism is gone, we're happy in communism, whatever, is just idealistic, childish, and ultimately ignorant.
Okay.
So,
anything
else you want to add?
Then again, this video was for a general audience. But then again, there are so many things that are just not accurate that...
Even if it is for a general audience, he simplifies these concepts to such an extent that he totally misrepresents them.
Even if he does have this knowledge as we do, he's portraying it in such a way that it's so biased. It's this type of thing that, this type of telling of Marxist-Leninist teachings is what makes people, I guess, who are very much fans of his audience, think of Marxism-Leninism as this dogmatic, crazy, insane thing, when a lot of these things they're just not accurate, and it's unfair for, Marxist-Leninists to have to make these kinds of response videos to respond to these things which should already be in the common knowledge of leftists in general. Listen, if I don't know, I'm not an expert on anarcho-communism or all these things, but I don't put my word on anarcho-communism if I am not an expert on that. And there are many things that, I still have to read regarding anarcho-communism. I've read some Kropotkin, right. Mutual aid, those things, but I'm not going to go out and say all of these borderline slanderous things against an ideology that isn't, that I'm not super familiar with. And it's clear, I guess, he's not very familiar with what we actually say. And that's a problem that I find with attacking other ideologies on the left, because then often things are misrepresented and then then we have bitter infighting over stupid issues, when instead of advocating against other leftist ideologies, we should instead be advocating for why ours is better, not why the other is shittier.
Right, and especially like what people should take away is Marxism-Leninism is not about ideals. It's about practicality. It's about a scientific outlook on societal development and the socioeconomic, the politiconomy, right? We are realists and materialists to the core, and that's simply why, like, I think that's simply why there's such a disconnect, because anarchists are just totally unfamiliar with, or at least from my experience, seem to be totally unfamiliar with the materialist outlook on reality, and insist on having this idealist view, and ultimately it's detrimental. It creates videos like these where you have total misrepresentations and total misunderstandings about the real parts of Marxist and Leninist theory. Like, it's just sad, because clearly this person is not a fucking idiot. Like,
oh yeah.
And he could be promoting a more realistic and a more practical and a more materialist and a more just reasonable view, but is not, because they've been subverted by this idealism. And so the Vanguard Party was good for Russia in its time. It was the right thing for them to do in their time, and that is why they succeeded. It's not the reason why the USSR collapsed. It's not the reason why China collapsed. And ultimately, like, we have to understand that the Vanguard Party simply exists to organize revolution and weed out counter-revolutionary elements in society. It is a temporary thing. The Vanguard Party is not a permanent body that exists. It exists simply for the purpose of revolution and defeating counter-revolutionary forces and elements. And once, this is why Stalin was trying to remove the Central Committee from the party, the party from government, because once Stalin's 5-year plans had succeeded and etc., and once the purges were over, Stalin did not see a reason. Stalin and his colleagues, this includes Beria, Kaganovich, Molotov, etc., they did not see a reason for the party to be involved in government anymore. Essentially, the remnant of the Vanguard Party had done its job, and it's time for its end. And so, unfortunately, what ended up happening eventually is Stalin died, and then his colleagues were politically assassinated by the Khrushchevites and essentially reactionary elements within the party. And so, really, it was a culmination of things that ended the USSR, but it absolutely was not the Vanguard Party. The Vanguard Party was one of the many reasons why the Russian Revolution was successful, and its relevance became less and less. The Vanguard Party was no longer relevant post-war. Like, after the war was over, the Vanguard Party was no longer a relevant thing, and
kind of say, like, regarding that, it wasn't Vanguardism as intended. It was revisionism.
Right.
Right. It was a different ism that
right,
necessitated
exactly.
that. I find a very interesting connection, and that connection is there. He makes the connection between Stalin, like the elevation of one man, and the Vanguard Party having this kind of absolute, kind of idealist characteristic, like its absolute nature, when in reality Stalin was one of the premier people trying to get away the Vanguard Party and get away the cult of personality. And these conflations, these issues in the telling of history are just a matter of certain conditioning that's been brought on by misinformation and a general lack of knowledge. I mean, there's really no other way. There probably is technically there's another way, but in a realistic sense, there's really no other way to insist that these points are just, forgotten, and it's kind of unfair to the history that actually went down. And then, looking at what actually the history is told as, it's just sometimes very disheartening.
Yeah, and as I was saying, like in Cuba, Cuba had a Vanguard Party revolution. They had like a more modernized version of the Bolshevik Revolution, and they succeeded. And the Cuban government eventually did remove party from government. Like the Communist Party was completely separated from government, and that's why they still exist.
Insert the Azure scapegoat video thing.
Right. Yeah. And so ultimately, the Vanguard Party was not a perfect thing, and obviously the Vanguard Party had its problems and its vulnerabilities, and those show because the Central Committee's existence, or rather the party's existence in government, can be connected to the Vanguard Party ideal, right? But nonetheless, that happened, and it happened for a reason, and it did lead a successful revolution. And in some examples, it did not. The countries did not fall to revisionism. Like the fact that those countries fell to revisionism is not entirely because of the way that revolution was originally organized. It's also due to external factors. The foreign capitalist powers, the bourgeois powers of the world, incessantly trying to destroy existing socialism. And
the Parenti video that I also mentioned earlier can apply to this scenario as well. Why there was authoritarianism and quote unquote totalitarianism involved in the management of the USSR.
Right. We have a lot of Leninists out here that are not like Paul Cockshott is a Leninist. He calls himself a Leninist, but not uncritically a Leninist, right? So he obviously he is a Leninist, and he is critical of historical socialism, as all Leninists should be, because
yes.
Leninism is a theory. It is a scientific theory, and it needs to be constantly developed. We need to learn from the mistakes of the past, and continue to develop our theories more, and so in the future we can have more successful revolutions and etc. My point is that I'm certain that a Vanguard Party and a withering away and etc. Centralized revolution and then withering away of the state, class, and capital, etc., is far more reasonable than a spontaneous, decentralized mass line revolution followed by an immediate abolition of all class, capital, and state. Right.
I actually looked into his version though, and he didn't mention like a spontaneous though, which is interesting. It shows a kind of, I guess, an accepting of the fact that there will be things that need to happen in a relatively long process before that critical point actually happens, which I do respect from him. I should mention that, but some of the things he does say can be considered like spontaneous in the moment kind of things. So just covering our bases there.
Right. I understand.
All right. Is that everything?
Yeah, I guess that's everything. So, thank you, comrades, for watching. I will link Danov's channel in the description, as well as the source video. Woo! And I hope I see you guys in the next one.